The seventh flame. The dead man's eyes were white as communion wafers, his mouth frozen in a perfect circle of horror. As I administered last rites, the peculiar smell of burnt flesh filled the morgue, though his skin remained unmarked. This was the fourth victim this month. Father Michael? Detective Ross's voice carried an edge I'd grown to recognize. We found something inside the mouth. I turned to face him, my collar suddenly too tight. The detective held up an evidence bag containing what looked like ash. Not ash, I realized with growing unease, but the remnants of something burned from within. Like the others, Ross said, his knuckles white against the plastic bag. Burned from the inside out. That night, in the basement archives of St. Augustine's, I found the first reference to the seventh flame in a medieval text. The Latin was archaic, but one passage stood out with terrible clarity. Ira de manifestat in septimus flamma. The wrath of God manifests in the seventh flame. My hands trembled as I turned the brittle pages. Each paragraph described an ancient force, an angel of divine retribution that punished those consumed by wrath. The margins were filled with drawings of figures burning from within, their eyes bleached white by holy fire. A crash from above made me jump. At this hour, the church should have been empty. I found Detective Ross in the sanctuary, standing before the altar. 7 candles burned behind him, their flames unnaturally still in the drafty church. His service weapon lay on the altar stone. I figured it out, Father, he said without turning. Why the victims deserve it. Detective. The first one beat his wife for 20 years. The second, a pedophile who walked on a technicality. The third, his voice cracked. You know what they all had in common? Rage. They lived with it, breathed it, let it rule them. My own anger flared at his vigilantism, at the perversion of divine justice. The sensation started in my palms, a burning that spread up my arms like a fever. And you appointed yourself their judge? The words came out hotter than I intended. Ross finally turned. His eyes had begun to whiten at the edges. Someone has to protect the innocent. Isn't that what your God does? That's not how divine justice. I prayed for guidance, he cut me off. After my sister was murdered, the man who did it walked free. I prayed until my knees bled, and you know what answered? He smiled, and in the candlelight I saw smoke curl from between his teeth. The seventh flame. The temperature in the church rose dramatically. The candles behind Ross erupted into columns of white fire that reached for the vaulted ceiling. His skin began to glow from within, like a paper lantern concealing an inferno. Ross, listen to me. This thing isn't divine justice. It's using your anger, feeding on it, on all of us. My hands felt like they were pressed against hot coals. I feel it too, the rage, the righteous fury. But this isn't God's will. Then why does it feel so holy? The detective's chest cavity illuminated like a furnace, bones visible through suddenly translucent flesh. The smell of burning filled the church. Behind him, the altar cloth began to smoke. I had a choice. My own anger yearned for release, at Ross's murders, at the corruption of sacred ground, at the evil men do. The burn in my hands intensified, eager to join the inferno. Instead, I stepped forward and embraced him. I forgive you, I whispered. Ross went rigid in my arms. The heat was unbearable, but I held on, even as his flesh began to scorch my vestments. I forgive you, I repeated, and I ask for forgiveness for my own wrath. A sound like 1,000 wings beating filled the sanctuary. The flames roared up, then suddenly extinguished, plunging us into darkness. Ross collapsed, unconscious but alive, his skin cooling beneath my blistered hands. 6 months later, I still lead the anger management group in the church basement. My hands bear the scars of that night, raised, red marks that burn whenever I feel rage rising. Ross is here too, fresh from prison counseling, helping others understand the consuming nature of wrath. We begin each session by lighting a single candle. 6 flames we permit, but never a 7th. And in the quiet light, we speak of anger, of justice, of forgiveness. Above all, we remember that divine wrath and human rage are different things entirely, and that the hottest flames are not always holy. Sometimes in the darkness of the sanctuary, I swear I can still smell smoke. On those nights, I pray not for justice, but for mercy, because I've learned that while God's wrath may be perfect, ours never is. It burns us from within, leaving only ash and white eyes until we learn to let it go.